The bulk of the world's volcanoes we do not see. They sit under the ocean, they change the heat balance of the ocean, they pump huge amounts of carbon dioxide into ocean water, it dissolves, it doesn't bubble up to the surface, and later it's released into the atmosphere. None of that enters the equations of the IPCC and scientists looking at climate change. So we have these extraordinary events. And there's some interesting ways of looking at this. We can look at the history of time. And when we look at the history of time, we've had massive, rapid climate changes. They appear to be related to the coincidence of a number of factors. The rate of change is far greater than anything we measure on Earth today, and the degree of change is far greater. But if we look at how climate has affected humans, we humans have been around, Homo sapiens, although I've always doubted the sapiens bit, but we humans have been around for about 200,000 years. And the last great interglacial was between 128,000 years ago and 116,000 years ago. Sea level was about 7 metres higher. You can see it all up the coast. You can see it. All the areas from around Newcastle, Stockton, those areas there, you can see all the ancient beaches. That was a magnificent period of time. We had 4 hominids coexisting on planet Earth at the same time. Us, Homo sapiens, Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, the hobbits from Indonesia, Homo floresiensis and Homo erectus, upright human. We thrived in those warm times. Sea level was higher and it was at least 4 or 5 degrees warmer. And it all changed 116,000 years ago, and it started to cool down. And that cooling was very rapid. And that cooling was driven by an orbital change. This is the 100,000-year cycle of orbits. And that cooling continued and continued until Tobar erupted 74,000 years ago. And the eruption of Tobar was so great, and it put so much aerosol material into the atmosphere, that the planet really started to cool very quickly. We humans very nearly became extinct. And the geneticists tell us that we might have had somewhere between 8,000 and 15,000 humans existing on planet Earth after that eruption. It almost wiped us out. But during that cooling period from 74,000 years ago, we had a couple of warm periods about 60,000 years ago, another one about 28,000 years ago, and the other 3 hominids popped off. They became extinct. And we were in the zenith of the last ice age 18,000 years ago. We'd piled up Scandinavia with about 5 kilometres of ice, piled up North America with ice. Sea level was about 130 metres lower than now. Yet we humans could survive, and we humans can adapt. We can live on the ice sheets. We can live in the mountains. We can live at sea level. We can live in the deserts. We can live in hot climates. We have adapted to this planet and have adapted very, very well. And then we started to get a melting of the ice sheets. Now these ice sheets have not completely melted. In past interglacials, they didn't completely melt. Antarctica got its ice sheet 37 million years ago and has been through many, many warm periods. The ice sheets didn't completely melt. We had the North Pole get its ice sheet 2.67 million years ago. It's been through warm periods and didn't melt. So why did we get ice sheets? Because we've only had ice on planet Earth for less than 20% of time. In the case of Antarctica, it was when South America pulled away from Antarctica. We had a circumpolar current develop. We isolated Antarctica. We didn't connect any warm water, and the oceans carry much, much more heat than the atmosphere. We didn't connect any warm water to Antarctica. It froze. And that ice has basically been there for 37 million years, despite the fact we've had some very warm periods that have lasted for millions of years. In the case of the Northern Hemisphere ice sheet, that appeared with 2 coincidental events. One was when South America joined North America. The volcanoes cut the seaway between the Atlantic and the Pacific. That changed the heat balance. That cooled us down, and at the same time we had a supernoval eruption. Out there in space we bombarded Earth with cosmic radiation and we cooled down. That's when the Northern Hemisphere ice sheet started. And then these ice sheets go through cycles based on how close or how distant we are from the sun. So those cycles are fairly well established, and we can see that the cycle ended about 14,000 years ago. And we had rapid global warming. Sea level went up not the 1 or 2 millimetres that people are worried about. Sea level went up that much every year, and that's the average sea level rise over the last 14,000 years. That is a very considerable sea level rise, and that is quite normal. We had warming. Then we had a period of great cooling, a bitter period for about 300 years. Then it warmed again. And then we had an exceptionally cold period called the Younger Dryas. This is when we humans invented animal husbandry, invented agriculture, started to live in villages. And we came out of that very cold period extremely quickly. We had a temperature rise of about 20 degrees Celsius over 15 years. Now that's global warming. And what happened to we humans? We thrived, because we humans are creatures of warm climates. Then we had the inevitable cooling. Then we had another warming period, and at about 6,000 years ago, it was a couple of degrees warmer than now. Sea level was a couple of metres higher than now. And we can see it anywhere along the coast here. You can see a nick in the cliffs just above the rock platform. And this is where the waves were attacking the cliffs 6,000 years ago. And then it became very, very dry. And we had a 300-year drought. And that 300-year drought changed the Sahara from grasslands and copses of trees into a desert. We don't get deserts in warm climates. Deserts form when it's cold. And we see that right through the record of the history of the planet. And we had the end of great civilizations, the Harappans and the Akkadians. They disappeared in that cold time. Then it got warm again, then it got cool again, then it got warm again in Roman times. And in Roman times, it was warm. The Romans grew olives right up the Rhine Valley, as far north as Bonn. They grew grapes as far north as Hadrian's Wall. It was warm. The Romans kept very good records of their agriculture. We know it was considerably warmer than now, possibly 5 degrees warmer than now. That warming event was a natural phenomenon. And if we are to argue that in today's world we are warming the planet, then we have to be able to say, well, this is above and beyond any natural process, such as the Roman warming, which came to a magnificent end in 535 AD with the explosion of Krakatoa, filled the atmosphere with aerosols. In 536 AD, Rubal exploded, filled the atmosphere with aerosols. And in November 536, and if you ever want to get paranoid, November's the worst month. That's when you get more volcanoes, and that's when we go through cometary dust. And the atmosphere was full of aerosols. It was dark. That was the Dark Ages. We had crop failure, we had famine, we had civil unrest. The weakened population got hit by the plague. Half of Constantinople got wiped out. 60% of Europe got wiped out by the plague. That was the Dark Ages. And then we came into this wonderful warm period, the medieval warming, in 900 AD. It was so warm that the Vikings grew grapes in Newfoundland. You couldn't grow grapes in what the Vikings called Vinland. You couldn't grow grapes there today. The Vikings had barley and wheat and sheep and cattle in Greenland. The Pope sent a bishop to Greenland. Eric the Red was trying to encourage immigration. Come to wonderful Greenland. The Vikings travelled. They traded with the Persians. They traded bits of meteorite and fur and amber for silver, which they melted down and made armbands. There was so much reliable, good agriculture in Europe that there was excess wealth. This wealth was spent on building the great monasteries, the great cathedrals, the great universities. Now, you don't say, oh, today I'm going to build a university and finish it next week. Those buildings took generations to build. There was generational wealth, generational prosperity, massive population increase, and that's what global warming in the past has done. It's given us prosperity. And it all came to an end when the sun started to get a little bit lazy, about 1280 AD, didn't blast away enough cosmic radiation, and it took us 23 years to go from that wonderful warm period into the Little Ice Age. And in the Little Ice Age, it was incredibly cold. We had the Gulf of Bothnia freeze about in 1303. We had multiple freezings, we had unreliable crops, we had famine, we had climate refugees going through Europe, trying to get food. There was possibly cannibalism. The weakened population got hit by the plague in 1347. Took 250 years for the European population to get back to what it was in 1280. We had some excessively cold periods when the sun was lazy. These excessively cold periods were when we had civil unrest, when the Dutch masters painted these wonderful hoarfrosts, when we had the ice fairs on the Thames, and it was exacerbated by the odd volcano, Tambora, in 1815.